All right. So we are already well into the topic of entity relationship diagrams. So far, um, we've talked about the topic of or the idea of entities and entities having attributes and how they could be related with each other and how we could organize our data in terms of these entities. All right. Now, when we say entities could be related with each other, that part we haven't explored into detail so much so far. Right. So that's what we're going to start with in this session. A session হচ্ছে গিয়ে what relationships are, how we can represent relationships, how relationships are represented in ERDs. We'll look into that, and also some of the things that we've already done. Some of the for example, let's say multi-valued attribute and composite attribute and so on, some of the things that we've already seen, how we could also represent those ideas in terms of relationships. We'll see many such things throughout this entire session. First, let's start with the idea of a relationship. What is a relationship? Remember, we represent our data objects in terms of entities. The data objects regarding which we need to maintain data objects which will have instances, data objects which have a set of attributes, we represent them in terms of entities. And all of these entities relate these entities with each other based on the interactions between the entities. For example, if course is an entity, student is an entity, the fact that a student registers for a course, how do we represent that? Via a relationship. Relationship ta konta? Registers for a course. It is student registers for a course. Student is an entity. Course is an entity. A student registers for a course. AJ registers, this part, the one in the middle, that is the relationship. Chinta koro, student, left side e amar ekta entity, course, right side e amar ekta entity. Student registers for a course. এই দুটার মাঝে আমি একটা কানেকশন এস্টাবলিশ করলাম না, একটা অ্যাসোসিয়েশন এস্টাবলিশ করলাম না, that is my relationship. Right? So on that note, just how we have entity type and entity instances, similarly in terms of relationship as well, we have relationship types, relationship instances. Relationship type is the relationship between the entity. A registers relationship jeta amra bolchi, registers relationship between student and course, that is a relationship type between the student entity and the course entity. Student entity, course entity মাঝখানে একটা relationship আছে. What relationship is that? The registers relationship. And now what is an example of an instance of this relationship, this registers relationship? A registers relationship er ekta example ki hobe? How do we instantiate this relationship? Does anyone have any ideas? We sort of had these discussions a little bit on the book.
Specific
1, 2, 3, 4, yeah, person register CSC 303 section 4 autumn 21.
Yes, exactly. Yes, that's right, Chapa. Thank you very much for remembering that. Very good. Yes, exactly that. So when we say student, entity type ta, course, entity type ta, এদের মাঝে relationship registers. এটার কথা যখন বলছি, registers is a relationship or relationship type. But the moment we talk about the relationship between the instances of the entities, which entities? The student and course entity. Student entity একটা instance যদি নিয়ে আনি, course entity একটা instance যদি নিয়ে আনি, ঠিক আছে? For example, if I say that Shaba is registered in CC303 in this semester, autumn 2021, in section 4, blah, blah. The moment I mention the student's instance, for example, Shaba, and the course's instance, for example, CC303, becomes a relationship instance, right? Also, relationships themselves can also have attributes. There can be certain situation when an attribute, it doesn't make sense for a certain attribute to belong to either one of the entity types that are being associated by the relationship. It could just be like that. For example, Shaba registers for CC303. On what date? Let's say, for example, কোন একটা date, June, July, whatever, ধরো, let's say July হচ্ছে গিয়ে CC303 জন্য register করেছে। ঠিক আছে? July certain একটা date, 23rd July, let's say, right? So এই যে 23rd July 2021 the fact that Shaba has registered for CC303, এই dateটাকে আমি কার আন্ডারে বসাবো? স্টুডেন্টের আন্ডারে নাকি কোর্সের আন্ডারে? The registration date, the date on which the student has registered for the course, where do I place that registration date? Registration date clearly is an attribute, right? Registration date doesn't sound like an entity. Does it to you guys? Registration date.
Will be inside the relationship.
Why though? Why not student? Why not course? Why can Shaba হচ্ছে কি CC303 জন্য register করেছে, right? So registration data স্টুডেন্টের আন্ডারে আমি কেন রাখতে পারছি না? স্টুডেন্টের আন্ডারে ওই শাবার নেম থাকবে, ওর date of birth, blah blah blah, এরকম অনেক কিছু থাকবে, and then registration date রাখলাম. Why not? Why not?
It just doesn't make sense.
Why?
First of
It
all,
might
this
have
can
multiple
vary.
values.
Yeah, but it doesn't really relate to the students.
It does relate to the student, but doesn't relate only to the student. Name, the student's name, does that have anything to do with any other entity type? No.
Yeah, but the registration date does not give me any solid information if it is inside the student entity. Plus,
No,
this can
yeah,
vary from
you're right there.
time
The
to time.
registration date shouldn't be a part of the student entity at all. But my question is why? Let's talk about that. The
If she
registration date.
registers
First of all,
again, if
Come
she
again?
registers again, then like we would have to
Good point.
update the data again and again and again in the student database, and
Good
then we
point.
will have multiple instances of Shaba, right? Which is like redundant data. To some
Either
degree.
that or you'd have to
Also, it doesn't
constantly-
describe the student.
That's right, as well. So a lot of things. So yeah, you guys are on point on a couple of these things. Yeah. See, first and foremost, something along the lines of where Shafayat was going. Registration. Sure, it's related to the student actually. It's not that it's not related to the student, like you were suggesting. However, it doesn't concern only the student. Registration comes into light when we talk about both student and the course. কোর্স ছাড়া তো শুধুমাত্র স্টুডেন্টের ক্ষেত্রে রেজিস্ট্রেশন ডেটের কথাটা আসে না। রেজিস্ট্রেশন ডেট নিয়ে আমরা কখন কথা বলি? যখন স্টুডেন্ট একটা কোর্সের জন্য রেজিস্টার করে। সো ইট হ্যাজ টু ডু উইথ বোথ দ্য স্টুডেন্ট অ্যান্ড দ্য কোর্স। চিন্তা করে দেখো, সো ফার আমরা স্টুডেন্টের যতগুলো অ্যাট্রিবিউট নিয়ে কথা বলেছি, every single one of those attributes belong to the student and only the student. All right? Student name. It's not concerned with any of the other entity types. Student name bolo, student ID bolo, student's date of birth, address, email address, GPA, anything, CGPA, anything you could talk about, all of that, those are solely characteristics of the student. However, when we talk about registration date, is it just a characteristic of the student? No. Registration date niye discussion ta ashe jokhon ekta student ekta course er jonno register kore. So both of them are being associated. So registration date je shudhumatro student er sathe associated ta na, she kintu at the same time ekta course er sathe associated. Abar shudhumatro ekta course er sathe associate korte parbo ta na. Ekta student ekta course e register korle registration date ta ashe. That's one. Second, something along the line of what Sabith was talking about. Let's say Shaba registers for a different course. Let's say Shaba registers for CC303 again next semester, or some other course. What will we do in those cases? I'm just a student under Rakhi. Shaba the student ekta matro instance, ekta unique instance. Shaba's ID is a unique student ID. So tar je rota thakbe, student ID te Shaba student ID name is, it's her name and so on. And then registration date er under it. Ami kon registration date ta rakbo? The date on which Shaba registered for CC303, or the date on which she registers for some other course later on or before or whatever. Konda rakbo? Multiple dates rakbo? That's not a very good data structure. All right. Similarly, registration date to the course under rakhi. What's the issue there? Can anyone point out on the same note? If I put registration date under the course entity, on the same.
So there are lots of
Yeah.
students who are trying to register for that course, right? Every semester, right? So
That's
কয়জনের টা রাখবে?
Exactly. There you go. Look at the number of students we have in this course. So আমি CC303 যেই রোতে রেখেছি, ঠিক আছে, কোর্স টেবলে আইডিতে CC303 নেম, ডেটাবেস ম্যানেজমেন্ট এন্ড সো অন, রেজিস্ট্রেশন ডেট ওই কলমের আন্ডারে CC303 যে রোটাতে আছে ওখানে আমি কয়টা ডেট রাখবো? In this semester, in this section only, there are multiple students, and that's the nature of the data, তাই না? So that's not going to work either. So in that case, it only makes sense for the attribute to belong to the relationship. Why? Because the registration date attribute will have a singular value for every single relationship instance. Relationship instance. What's an example of the relationship instance? A specific student registering for a specific course. Let's say, for example, Sabir Hossain Zishan. So Zishan registers for system analysis and design next semester, right? So when he registers for that course, ওই কোর্সের জন্য তার যে registration date, that I can associate with the relationship, তাই না? Zishan registers for the system analysis and design course on this date, all right, whatever date. Now that doesn't create any issues. That belongs to that specific relationship instance. Right? These ideas will become clearer as we look at more and more examples. For example, this one. Take a look at this one. Here, employee completes course. Completes is an example of a relationship which is associating the employee entity with the course entity, or vice versa. And every single one of these relationships connecting the employee instances with the course instances, these are our relationship instances. Employee completes course. This completes here is a relationship. Chen completes C++, however. Chen completes C++. Here, this completes is a relationship instance. So see the difference? So এটা হচ্ছে কি relationship relating to entity types, and this is a relationship. These lines that you see here, these lines are relationship lines, relationship instances associating the instances of the entity types. Chen completes C++, Chen completes Java, and so on. Every single one of these lines represent associations between the entity instances, right? And so on. Also, notice the nature of the relationship in terms of how many instances are participating from both sides. For example, as you can see, employees here. To take a look at the employee instances, what do you think? একজন এমপ্লয়ি কি মাল্টিপল কোর্স করতে পারে নাকি শুধুমাত্র একটা কোর্স করতে পারে?
Multiple course.
Multiple course, all right? That's also important. Remember, we saw this in our basic sample ERD, যেটা আমরা ডিসকাস করছিলাম last session, ঠিক আছে? Whether it's mandatory one, mandatory many, optional one, that sort of thing, right? Similarly, a single course can have multiple employees registered in them, or multiple employees completing that course, or a single employee. একটা কোর্সে কি multiple employee থাকতে পারবে নাকি single employee থাকতে হবে? Also think multiple, that's right. Also think about whether a course can exist without having any employee registered in that.
Yeah, Visual Basic.
Visual Basic, as you can see.
Visual Basic.
That's right. So এখানে এই নেচারটা দেখে, the way they are connected with each other, we can clearly say that a course may be completed by multiple employees. Why may? Can anyone tell me why may? What's the emphasis of the word may?
Just may not be as well.
Yes. So we use the term may when the participation is optional. আর optional কখন বলি? যখন এমন কোনো কোর্স আমার থাকতে পারে যেখানে কোনো এমপ্লয়ি নেই, দ্যাট ইজ কোনো এমপ্লয়ি এই কোর্সটা করেনি, অলরাইট? So a course may be completed by multiple employees. May, we are using this term, and the significance of this term is that a course may exist which hasn't been completed by any employee at all. That is, it's an optional mini participation. However, on this side, we see that every single employee has completed a course, and they can do multiple courses as well. But we can't be sure whether it's optional. We know that it's multiple, Many participation, if that we're sure, but whether it's optional or mandatory, that we can't tell, because everyone has completed a course. However, whether it's optional or mandatory, for that we're going to have to take a look at the ERD. On that note, let's talk about some of the defining things of a relationship. One of those things is the degree of a relationship. By the degree of a relationship, we're talking about the number of entity types that are being associated by a relationship. All right? For example, here, this relationship, the complete relationship, we'll call this a binary relationship. Why a binary relationship? Because two entity types are being associated by this entity. By this relationship. All right? Two entity types. So when two entity types are associated by a relationship, we call that a binary relationship. Similarly, a student registers for a course. What about that? Student registers for a course in that case.
Binary.
How many entity types are participating there? How many entity types are participating there?
3.
3.
2.
2.
Student registers for a course. Student.
Okay. In that
course.
case, 2.
That's 2.
But I
These
was
are
thinking
our-
of faculties.
No, we're not talking about that yet. So student registers for a course. So
This is
here, for
binary.
this relationship, it's a binary relationship, right? Because there are two entity types, student and course. Right? Now, what about the other two types of relationship that we have based on the degree? Unary relationship, ternary relationship. We call it a unary relationship when an entity type is associated with itself. That is, the relationship is associating a single entity type with itself. Unary, we call it unary. That is actile entity type. And ternary, when there are three entity types, as simple as that. When a relationship is associating three entity types at the same time. So this is an example of a unary relationship, all right? As you can see here, this rectangular box with sharp edges obviously represents our entity type. And when a relationship associates an entity type, a certain entity type with itself, we call it a unary relationship. And when it associates three entity types together, we call it ternary, and this one will be binary. These are the three relationship types based on degree. Please remember that, please recall that when you will have to face Viva sessions for your answers in the midterm exams. You will have to answer questions based on these terminologies, all right? What is the degree of the relationship? And if you don't remember what the meaning of the term degree is, then basically your Viva will go south from there. Yeah, moving on. Examples of unary relationship, right? So here, this one here is a unary relationship which is relating the person entity type with itself. Here, this manages relationship is associating the employee entity type with itself. Here as well, as you can see, this relationship associating team entity type with itself. So every single one of these three relationships, every single one of these three are unary relationships, right?
Miss, why is that manages background manages thing different across food asset actor?
Just to show you
Manages many
examples
employees.
of many different types of cardinalities in unary relationships as well. So see
okay.
here. Right. So an employee manages many other employees, all right? What is that relationship? Yes, it's unary, but other than that, there's another thing that we discussed, the cardinality, remember? This is a one-to-many relationship. We've talked about this in the sample ERD. It basically goes out to say that a single employee can manage multiple employees at the same time. Single employee can manage multiple employees at the same time. However, a single employee will be managed by exactly one employee, right? The cardinality is not actually complete here. And by no means do I want you to assume that this is the standard we adhere to in an ERD. If you were to draw the ERD for your exam, we would be looking for the symbols in a lot more detail. যে এতটুকু এখানে যেমন কি এক সাইডে হচ্ছে গিয়ে কোনো স্পেসিফিকলি কোনো কিছু মেনশন করা নেই, ওই যে ডাবল বারও দেয় না, একটা বার একটা সার্কেলও দেয় নেই। Even here on the crow's foot, no bar, no circle is given. So here, the symbol, actually the cardinality symbols are incomplete. But just to give you a rough idea, that unary relationship এর মধ্যেও one to one, one to many এই ধরনের cardinality থাকতে পারে, এটার জন্য এখানে এই জিনিসটা দেয়। You will see in more examples as we see later on that the symbols have been perfected basically. All right, here just to show you that unary relationship এর মধ্যেও হচ্ছে কি you will see one to one, many to many, even one to many relationships, one to many type relationships. Okay, so here we're talking about a relationship where an employee can manage multiple employees, right? However, an employee is managed by one employee, so it's a one-to-many relationship. But this one, on the other hand, this is a one-to-one relationship. Why? Because there is no crow's foot. So crow's foot net, so this is a one-to-one relationship for sure. Okay, a person is married to one other person. All right, all of them are person instances, but it's a unary relationship and it's a one-to-one relationship. Here, a team stands after one other team. All of them are team instances, but one-to-one, right? And since we are relating the instances of an entity type with the instances of the same entity type, it's a unary relationship, right? Now, binary relationship, yes.
টিমটা একটু বলবেন কিভাবে এটা মানে ইউনারি রিলেশনশিপ হবে?
Let's say, for example, let's talk about a match, right? Two teams are playing with each other, playing against each other. So let's say Man U is playing Chelsea, right? So what is Man U? আমরা যদি টিম এন্টিটিটার কথা বলি, ম্যান ইউটাকে কি বলতে পারি? টিমের ইনস্টেন্স বলতে পারি না?
জি
চেলসি কি বলতে পারি? টিমের ইনস্টেন্স বলতে পারি না?
জি।
তাহলে এই যে ম্যান ইউ is playing a match against Chelsea, or Chelsea is playing a match against Man U, ঠিক আছে? যে they are playing each other, যে playing relationship যেটা, এই রিলেশনশিপটা কি করছে? একটা টিমের ইনস্টেন্সকে আরেকটা টিমের ইনস্টেন্সের সাথে অ্যাসোসিয়েট করছে না? একটা ফুটবল ম্যাচে একটা টিমের সাথে তো আরেকটা টিমই খেলবে, একটা টিম কি মাল্টিপল টিমের সাথে একই ম্যাচে খেলতে পারবে? Can Man U play multiple teams at the same time in a single match?
No, miss.
No, it can't. So that is an example of this relationship here, you can say, right?
Okay.
Let's say Man U is playing Chelsea. Man U কিন্তু টিমের ইনস্টেন্স, Chelsea কিন্তু টিমের ইনস্টেন্স। তার মানে কি? টিম এন্টিটি টাইপটার সাথে আমি টিম এন্টিটি টাইপকে অ্যাসোসিয়েট করছি, তাই না? অন্য কোন এন্টিটি টাইপ কি এখানে আছে? চিন্তা করে দেখো, রিলেশনশিপের দুই সাইডে কারা আছে? দোনোটাই টিমের ইনস্টেন্স। দ্যাট মিন্স টিম ইজ রিলেটেড উইথ টিম, দ্যাট ইজ টিম ইজ অ্যাসোসিয়েটেড উইথ টিম। তাহলে তো ইউনারি রিলেশনশিপই হলো, অন্য কোনো এন্টিটি টাইপ তো এখানে নেই, একটাই এন্টিটি টাইপ আছে, তাই না?
জি মিস, বুঝতে পারছি।
Okay, all right. Any other questions? Anyone? Right, moving on. So binary relation. These are not binary relations, it's relationship. There's a difference you will quickly find out once we are done with the topic of ERD. Relations have a separate meaning in the realms of database design. Okay. Right. So here, every single one of these three examples are binary relationships. Why is that? Why are these binary relationships? Is the sign contains, that's right, that's right. Is the sign contains registers for all of these three relationships are associating two entity types on each side, as you can see, on both sides. So employee is assigned parking space. Employee is an entity type, parking space is another entity type. Duta entity associated with it. So it's a binary relationship. Right? And if we were to talk about the cardinality, once again, the notations aren't complete here, but still just the fact that the crow's foot is not here, that gives us a hint that it's one-to-one. Okay? Here, product contains product. This one is one-to-many, we can think of it That is closed foot on only one side. This one, on the other hand, it's a many-to-many relationship. So it registers for hooks. Okay. Now, finally, ternary relationship. Ternary relationships are those which associate three entity types at the same time. Right? Three entity types at the same time, as you can see here, which is being done by the relationship between vendor, part, and warehouse. The supplies relationship specifically between vendor, part, and warehouse. So three entity types associated by one relationship. Don't get confused by this line. The dashed line you see here, this is not a part of the relationship line. That's a separate thing. We'll talk about that later. আপাতত এই যে dash লাইনটাকে একটু ignore করো. We'll talk about it. For now, focus on the three lines here, conjoined together at the center by the supplies relationship. Right? So this is the relationship line. এই যে part, vendor, warehouse এর সাথে যে connectionটা, এই যে তিনটা লাইন যে একসাথে connected হলো, this is the relationship line. Dash লাইনটা আপাতত আমরা একটু ignore করি. হ্যাঁ? Let's talk about the supplies relationship. So it's associating three different entity types together. Vendor, supplies, part to warehouses. Vendor, supplies, part to warehouses. So তিনটা entity type একটা single relationship আমরা associate করছি. That's why it's a ternary. Now, coming into this part, this dashed line we use when we want to associate attributes, or when we want to assign attributes to a relationship, then we use this dashed line. So remember, when an entity has an attribute, আমরা attribute গুলোকে কোথায় রাখি? একটা entity attribute গুলো আমরা কোথায় place করি? Where do we place them? The attributes of an entity.
Inside the table.
We don't have any tables in the ERD. ERD তে কোনো table আছে নাকি? ERD তে তো কোনো table নেই. Table তো আছে পরে, মানে table comes in later. But ERD তে, where do we place the attributes?
It's inside the boxes.
That's right, inside the entity boxes.
Yeah,
Entity je box gulo there.
Yeah.
But the relationships don't have any boxes. Relationship এ তো নিজস্ব কোনো box নেই. Relationship তো just একটা নাম থাকে, একটা label থাকে, and the relationship lines. That's all. So where do we place the attributes? This is how. Right? We use the dashed line. This dashed line has a significance. This is a part of the notation. A dashed line use korte hobe. You cannot use a solid line here. You cannot use a dotted line here. You have to use a dashed line here. That's a part of the notation. যখন একটা রিলেশনশিপ লাইনের সাথে একটা ড্যাশ লাইন টেনে আমি এরকম একটা বক্সের মধ্যে কয়েকটা অ্যাট্রিবিউট রাখবো, it means that those attributes are assigned to the relationship which it is connected to. All right, as you can see here, supplies relationship এর সাথে ড্যাশ লাইন দিয়ে হচ্ছে গিয়ে আমরা এই বক্সের মধ্যে দুটো অ্যাট্রিবিউট রেখেছি. How do we know, first of all, that these two are attributes? By two things. First of all caps এখানে কোনো কিছু রাখা হয়. So that should tell you that entity type এর যে nameটা, the name of the entity type, for example, the vendor entity type, name of the entity type is vendor, name of the entity type is part, name of the entity type is warehouse. এই যে entity type যেটা, ওটা all caps এ থাকে. এখানের ভিতর all caps এ কোনো কিছু নেই, মানে this is not an entity type at all. More importantly, this dashed line is the bigger giveaway. The dashed line, since there is a dashed line, a dashed line দেখেই বুঝতে হবে যেটা হচ্ছে গিয়ে these are attributes belonging to the relationship. You will see this dashed line used only for this specific case. The dashed line টা রিলেশনশিপের সাথে কানেক্ট করে ইউজ করা হয়, রিলেশনশিপ লাইনের সাথে কানেক্ট করে ড্যাশ লাইন ইউজ করা হয় শুধুমাত্র যখন রিলেশনাল অ্যাট্রিবিউট থাকে. We call them relational attributes. When there are attributes belonging to the relationship, only then we use this dashed line connected with the relationship line. So these two, shipping mode and unit cost, are actually attributes which belong to the supplies relationship. These are relational attributes of the supplies relationship, shipping mode and unit cost, right? So for example, an instance of the supplies relationship, a relationship instance of this relationship could be that a certain vendor, let's say vendor X, as it says here in the example, supplies a certain part, a specific part, part C, to a specific warehouse, warehouse Y, with a certain shipping mode value and a certain unit cost, right?
Ma'am?
Yeah.
Is there any significance of the like bolder blue line and the
Oh no,
thinner blue line?
nothing. No, nothing to do with that.
Okay.
There's nothing like that. I don't know why the line weight is different, but there's no significance as to that. All right. And also look at the cardinality. Right? Multiple vendors may supply a single part to multiple warehouses, and at the same time, a vendor may supply multiple parts to multiple warehouses, and so on. So basically, multiple vendors involved with the buyer, multiple parts involved with the buyer, multiple warehouse involved with the buyer in the supplies relationship. All right. However, I would say that it's still not clear that at a single vendor, quite a part supply korbe, quite a warehouse supply korbe, and so on. These things. There's a reason these things are not clear because of the way we are representing this relationship. All right. You will see that quickly. We'll introduce an idea which makes these cardinalities clearer in terms of ternary relationship. Ternary relationship এর ক্ষেত্রে আমরা আরেকটা এই যে একই জিনিস যেটা আমরা দেখতে পাচ্ছি যে তিনটা এন্টিটি অ্যাসোসিয়েটেড হচ্ছে and the relationship supplies relationship has relational attributes. এই একই জিনিসটা হচ্ছে আমরা একটু ডিফারেন্ট ওয়েতে রিপ্রেজেন্ট করব. Very soon you'll see that, and you'll see that the cardinalities are clearer in that representation. Both of them are correct, but in some cases, a different way of representing the same information is just clearer. All right. If you were to use this specific notation in your ERD, that's completely fine. That's completely all right, as long as your notations are complete. In this case, that's where the difficulty lies. এখানে দেখো close food দেয়া আছে, but do we know whether the participation is mandatory or optional? Do we know that? No. See here, কোনো বার দেয়া নেই, কোনো সার্কেল দেয়া নেই. Close food এর সাথে বার থাকলে, what do we know? It's a mandatory participation. If it's a circle, what do we know? Optional. But এখানে কিন্তু none of that is mentioned here. You must mention that in an ERD. In an ERD, the optional or mandatory participation, it must be there. Otherwise, it's incomplete. However, এখানে এই জিনিসটা assign করাটা একটু difficult হবে. If you were to assign it correctly, then fine. You can go ahead with this notation. But in order to assign it correctly, you'd have a lot of difficulty, which you'll see that will be easier to assign those things or make sense of the participation, level of participation in a different sort of representation, which we'll look at. Now, cardinality. We already know what, we already have some idea of the cardinality of relationships. So, আমরা যে বলছি যে one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many, all of these things are types of relationships based on cardinality. Just how relationships can be of three types, based on degree, relationships can be of three types based on cardinality as well. You could have one-to-one relationships where you associate exactly one entity instance with another entity instance. At a single entity instance or a single instance of an entity cannot be associated with multiple entity instances at the same time. For example, a team playing another team, right? Single instance associated with a single instance. At a single team, একই match multiple team against a play korbe na in a football match. That is, right? So that's one-to-one. One-to-many. What is an example of one-to-many? An employee manages multiple other employees. A supervisor who manages, or a manager who manages other employees is also an employee, তাই না? একজন supervisor or একজন manager যে হচ্ছে অন্যান্য এমপ্লয়ীদেরকে ম্যানেজ করে or supervise করে. That person, himself or herself, is an employee, right? So an employee manages multiple other employees, but a single employee who is being managed will be managed by a single supervisor. Usually একজন employee একজনই supervisor থাকে. An employee has a single supervisor, a single manager. All right. So it doesn't go, the participation basically is not many on both sides. That is, একজন employee multiple employee কে manage করতে পারে, but একজন employee একজনই manager থাকবে. Think about it from both sides. A single employee will have a single manager or a single supervisor, but তার যে supervisorটা আছে, ওই supervisor multiple employee কে manage করতে পারে. So it's a one-to-many participation. All right. Think about university and students. When you're doing your undergrad, think about that. Can IUB have only a single student or multiple students?
Multiple students.
Multiple. However, can a student do their be enrolled for the undergrad in multiple universities at the same time? Usually, what's the nature of the relationship type?
No.
No.
Usually,
It's
The
like,
university can have multiple students enrolled in it, but a student can enroll in only one university. Right now, that is also one-to-many relationship. The university, see, can have multiple students enrolled in it, but every single student will be enrolled in exactly one university. So it's a one-to-many relationship there as well. Same goes for a school as well. Same goes for so many things like that. Usually, that's how it's like. And then we have many-to-many relationship. For example, you registering for a course. Student registers into a course. A student may register into multiple courses. A course will have multiple students registered in it. It's a many-to-many relationship. Simple. So we have notations for every single one of these cardinalities, all right? So when it's a one-to-one relationship on both sides, we will have this bar closer to the entity box, this bar here. However, it's a many-to-many relationships on both sides will have this crow's foot, all right? And if it's a one-to-many relationship, on one side you'll have the bar, and on one side we'll have the crow's foot. Tahole, preceding the bar, preceding the crow's foot, that is to the left, এই যে এখানে একটা circle আছে, এখানে একটা circle আছে, and to the left here we have a bar here. What do they represent? The level of participation, whether it's mandatory or optional, right? Here, for example, if it's a bar, it's a mandatory participation. The bar on the right side here, the bar on the right side represents the fact that it's a single entity instance who's going to participate. A single entity instance participation, that is one participation, one instance. That is represented by the bar on the right-hand side. And the bar on the left-hand side represents mandatory participation. So it's exactly one, or mandatory one participation. Here, the crow's foot on the right-hand side represents many participation. That is multiple instances can participate. And this bar on the left-hand side represents mandatory. That is at least one must participate. It could be multiple, it could be many. It could be more than one for sure. But at least one must be there. It's a mandatory many. That is at least one must be there, but it could be many based on this crow's foot. Similarly here, on the right-hand side we have crow's foot, so representing many participation, but on the left-hand side we have circle, which means optional many. That is multiple instances could participate in the relationship, but none could participate at the same time. That is 0 or more. Here we have 1 or more, this one is 0 or more, and this one is 0 or 1. Okay. Now moving on. Here, what is the cardinality of this relationship, the has recorded relationship between patient and patient history? Can anyone tell me that based off of what we've discussed so far?
Mandatory one to mandatory many.
That's right, mandatory one to mandatory many. Thank you very much for pointing out the mandatory part. You must mention that part as well when you're talking about cardinality. So it's a mandatory one to mandatory many participation. Now, let's talk about what that means for the relationship instances, all right? So, a patient has recorded many patient histories, fine. So, a mandatory one to mandatory many, what does that mean? It means that a single patient instance will have recorded multiple patient history. For example, here, look at here. Every single one of these patients, Mark, Sarah, Elsie, all of them have recorded patient history. So mandatory participation. So at least একটা patient history record তাদের থাকবেই. That's what it means. If a patient has recorded multiple patient history. So it's a mandatory যেটা, this part here, this single bar here to the left of the crow's foot, it represents the fact that প্রত্যেকটা patient instanceর at least একটা patient history record থাকবে, but there could be more than one. As you can see here, Sarah has been recorded for 2 patient history reports, right? Sarah has 2 patient history reports, visit 1, visit 2. Sarah has 2 patient history reports. So basically, there could be multiple, but at least 1 patient history record must be there in the database in order to record or put data into the database regarding these entities, right? Every single patient instances must have at least 1 patient history record, but there could be more. On the other hand, in a single patient history record, there will be exactly one patient, right? একটা patient history recordে একটাই patient থাকে. For example, Mark's first visit. Mark's first visite শুধুমাত্র মার্কই থাকবে. Sarah's first visite শুধুমাত্র Sarah'রই রেকর্ড থাকবে. Sarah's second visite শুধুমাত্র Sarah'রই রেকর্ড থাকবে. LG's first visite শুধুমাত্র LG'রই রেকর্ড থাকবে. LG's first visit patient history recorded, there won't be data regarding any other patient, only and only LG, right? So that a single patient history record for a patient will have only a single, exactly 1 patient's record, right? Exactly 1, not more, not less. However, a single patient instance will have recorded multiple patient history records, all right? What about this one here? Yes.
ম্যাম এখানে তো হচ্ছে এই যে অ্যারো চিহ্নটা এটা তো ম্যান্ডেটরি মেনি, তাহলে এখানে তো ভিজিট 1 দেয়া, মানে এটা তো মেনি হচ্ছে না, এটা তো বুঝলাম না।
Visit 1 is the name of the patient history report. Visit 1 টা জাস্ট হচ্ছে কি নাম, এখানে বলছে না যে একটাই ভিজিট হবে বাইরে বলছি। Visit 1 হচ্ছে কি জাস্ট মার্কের ফার্স্ট ভিজিট 1 এর নাম দেয়া, ঠিক আছে?
মানে এখানে তো মেনি দেয়া, তাহলে তো সিঙ্গেল না।
Now, mandatory.
See Diba, when it says mandatory many, তার মানে এটা না যে প্রত্যেকটা পেশেন্টের মানে মাল্টিপল পার্টিসিপেশনই থাকতে হবে। That is what I'm trying to explain to you here is that একটা single patient,
At least one,
exactly, at least 1 patient history record থাকতেই হবে. That is what the mandatory part is talking about, ঠিক আছে? এখানে যখন mandatory বলি, এই যে mandatory 1 বলো বা mandatory তার মানে হচ্ছে কি at least একটা থাকতেই হবে. When it's mandatory, it means that at least 1 must be there. এই mandatory 1 মানে হচ্ছে কি exactly 1. কেন? কারণ mandatory মানে কি at least একটা, আবার mandatory 1 বলে দিয়েছে, তার মানে একের বেশিও হতে পারবে না। at least একটা হবে, বাট একের বেশিও হতে পারবে না, তার মানে কি exactly 1, তাই না? exactly 1. আবার এইখানে হচ্ছে কি mandatory many on the other hand, mandatory many তার মানে কি মাল্টিপল পার্টিসিপেশন থাকতে পারে, বাট at least একজন থাকবে, ঠিক আছে? at least একটা পার্টিসিপেশন থাকবে। অপশনাল মানে হচ্ছে কি 0 or 1, 0 or 1, মাল্টিপল থাকতে পারে বাট 0 থাকতে পারে। 0 or 1 মানে কি একজন থাকতে পারে অথবা 0 থাকতে পারে। So here when it says mandatory many, a patient has recorded multiple patient history reports, তার মানে হচ্ছে কি প্রত্যেকটা পেশেন্ট ইনস্টেন্সের at least একটা পেশেন্ট হিস্ট্রি রেকর্ড থাকবে। That's what the mandatory part is saying. Mandatory মানে হচ্ছে কি প্রত্যেকটা পেশেন্ট ইনস্টেন্সের at least একটা পেশেন্ট হিস্ট্রি রেকর্ড থাকবে, বাট একটার বেশিও থাকতে পারে। বাট একটা সিঙ্গেল পেশেন্ট হিস্ট্রি রেকর্ডে একজন পেশেন্টেরই রেকর্ড থাকবে, এক্স্যাক্টলি একজন পেশেন্টেরই রেকর্ড থাকবে, নট মোর নট লেস। দ্যাট ইজ এই যে মার্কের ফার্স্ট ভিজিট, যেটা Mark's first visit will have only Mark's record. Sarah's first visit will have only Sarah's record. Sarah's second visit will also have only Sarah's record. আর অন্য কোনো পেশেন্টের রেকর্ড ওখানে থাকবে না। So, right? Is that clear now?
Yes, ma'am, clear.
Okay, all right. Now, what about the is assigned to relationship? What about the cardinality here?
Mandatory many, optional many.
Mandatory many to optional many. That's right. Mandatory many to optional many. Now, what does that mean? It means that a single employee instance may be assigned to multiple projects, and a single project instance will be assigned to multiple employees. Notice the difference between the terminology that we're using. একটা ক্ষেত্রে may use করেছি, একটা জায়গায় will বলেছি, because may has a significance. may আমরা তখনই ইউজ করে থাকি যখন হচ্ছে কি অপশনাল পার্টিসিপেশন থাকে। এটা মাথায় রেখো। That's a pointer to you because ERD তে you will have to look out for these things. যেখানেই may দেয়া ওখানে তোমার বুঝে নিতে হবে আচ্ছা if it's may it's optional. All right. So here an employee may be assigned to multiple projects. Why am I saying may? Because এখানে optional participation. An employee may be assigned to multiple projects. As you can see here, optional মানে কি? There could be an employee who is not assigned to any project at all. As you can see here, Heidi is not assigned to any project. See here, Rose is assigned to 2 projects. Debbie is assigned to a single project. Tom is assigned to 3 projects. So একটা প্রজেক্টে আছে এরকম এমপ্লয়ি আছে, দুটাতে আছে এরকম আছে, তিনটাতে আছে এরকম আছে, আবার কোন প্রজেক্টে অ্যাসাইন্ড না এমন এমপ্লয়ি আছে, Pete and Heidi. All right. So basically an employee may be assigned to multiple projects. That is a single employee instance. Multiple projecte assign থাকতে পারে, একটা প্রজেক্টে অ্যাসাইন থাকতে পারে, আবার এমন এমপ্লয়ি ইনস্ট্যান্সও থাকতে পারে যে হচ্ছে কি কোনো প্রজেক্টেই অ্যাসাইন না, that is 0 or more. There could be such employee instances who are not assigned to any project at all. That's what we understand by the optional participation, 0 or more. As you can see, Pete and Heidi not assigned to any projects at all. On the other hand, a project is assigned to multiple employees. A project is assigned to multiple employees, or a project must be assigned to multiple employees. A project is assigned to, in whichever way you phrase it, as long as you do not use the term may, we know that it's a mandatory participation, mandatory many, but mandatory participation. A project is assigned to multiple employees. That is, a single project instance could be assigned to multiple employees at the same time, but must be assigned to at least one. That's when প্রত্যেকটা project at least একজন এমপ্লয়িকে অ্যাসাইন করা হয়েছে. As you can see here, the BPR project has been assigned to 2 employees at the same time. Both Rose and Tom are responsible for business process reengineering. The BPR project assigned to 2 employees at the same time. So basically, a single project instance could be assigned to multiple employees, yes, but must be assigned to at least 1 employee. প্রত্যেকটা project দেখো, TQM বলো, CR বলো, at least একজন employee আছে. Multiple employees could be assigned, but at least 1 must be there. On the other hand, employee কিন্তু কোন একটা project assigned হবে, that's not mandatory. So that's mandatory many to optional many. Is that clear, the example?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And finally, let's talk about this relationship. What is the degree and cardinality of this relationship?
Optional one.
Optional
Unary.
1 to optional 1
Optional one.
and degree unary.
That's
0 or 1. That's it.
No, we don't say 0 or 1. We understand it as 0 or 1, but it's optional 1 to optional 1. When I ask you the cardinality, the terminology, remember, the terminology is it's optional 1 to optional 1. And
It's
the degree
easier
of the
to
relationship-
understand when you say 0 or 1 for simplicity
Yes,
purposes.
for sure. But as you keep
So-
practicing, these things will be easier for you to remember, no? And then you would be expected, let's say, for example, in the Viva session, if I were to ask you, what is the degree and cardinality of this relationship? In that case, you'd have to go with optional 1 to optional 1 instead of what you said, all right? So optional 1 to optional 1. That is the correct terminology, all right? So these things the terminology will be clear to us as we keep practicing more and more, hopefully. Now, the degree, on the other hand, like you guys suggested, yes, it's unary. It's a unary optional 1 to optional 1 relationship. Right? So a person may be married to another person. Right? So optional 1 to optional 1, which means that a person may be married to another person. That is, a person instance could exist. A person instance could exist who is not married to anyone. A person instance could exist who doesn't participate in this relationship at all. If is married to relationship participate করে না এরকম instance থাকতেই পারে for the person entity type. But if they do participate, it's max 1. Right? A person may be married to another person. Not more than 1. Right? as you can see here, based on the instances of person. Shirley, Mag, Dawn, Kathy, Ellis, Fred, all of these are instances, examples of instances of the person entity type. As you can see here, there are two people here, Dawn and Fred, two instances of person. Dawn and Fred, two instances of person who haven't participated in the relationship at all. They haven't participated in the is married to relationship at all. So there could be person instances basically who aren't married to anyone. However, the instances who do participate, Shirley is married to Ellis, all right? It's a one-to-one participation. The ones who do participate, it's one-to-one. That is, a single person instance cannot be married to multiple other person instances at the same time. That's what this example is telling us. Shirley is married to Ellis, so one-to-one. Mac is married to Kathy, one-to-one, right? That is max 1, min 0. That's how you could understand it. Max 1, min 0 on both sides. Okay, now that we've talked about all there is to talk about regarding relationships, the basic concepts of a relationship, now let's see how we could represent some of the ideas that we've already talked about in entities and attributes using relationships, right? For example, the special type of attribute that we have here, which you guys will tell me, from you guys specifically, I want Nasif Mehdi, can you hear me? Nasif or Mehdi, whichever you go by, can you hear me? All right, so he's here but not here. Okay, moving on. Imran Siam.
Yes, miss.
Okay, so Imran, help us out here. Can you please tell me, in the course entity type, what type of attribute is prerequisite? Is it a regular attribute? Is it a primary key? What is it?
A composite.
Okay. What about your peers here? What do you guys think? Is it a composite attribute?
Multi-value.
Multi-valued attribute, all right, Imran? It's a multi-valued attribute. How do we know it's a multi-valued attribute, guys?
Curly braces.
Curly braces. So Imran, do you see here the prerequisite attribute is surrounded by second brackets? Curly braces are second brackets, right? Yeah. So yeah, it's surrounded by curly braces or second bracket, whichever you call it, right? So curly brace যখনই দেখবো, it's a multi-valued attribute. It's not a composite attribute. It's a multi-valued attribute. Multi-valued attribute মানে কি? একটা কোর্সের multiple prerequisite থাকতে পারে, right? How many prerequisites does CSE 303 have? Data structure, just one. Okay, all right. That's good. Let's say, for example, data structure has 2 prerequisites. Data structure ধরে নিলাম যে দুটো prerequisite আছে. Just for our discussion's sake.
101 and discrete mathematics.
Discrete mathematics.
Oh, it does have 2 prerequisites. Okay, all right.
Yes, miss.
So there you go. Yeah, very good. So course entity-টার কিছু instance-এর কথা চিন্তা করি। CSE 303 কথা চিন্তা করি, course ID-তে থাকবে CSE 303 value. Course title database management. Prerequisite কি থাকবে? কোন course ID? Which one is the prerequisite here?
CSE 203.
So prerequisite এর মধ্যে এই prerequisite column যেটা course table যদি চিন্তা করি, course যদি একটা table হিসেবে চিন্তা করি, prerequisite column এর আন্ডারে CSE 303 যে রোটা আছে, ওই রোতে prerequisite column এর আন্ডারে থাকবে CSE 203. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, CSE 203. Very good, fine. However, course table CSE 203 যে রোটা আছে, course ID value CSE 203, course title is data structure, prerequisite column under what will it look like?
তখন থাকবে CSE 101 আর
101 and
CSE 201.
CSE 101, comma CSE
201.
exactly. CSE 101, comma CSE 201. দুটা কোর্স রাখছি, ঠিক আছে? So that's one way of doing things or not doing things. But as long as you're at the ERD level, that is ERD যতক্ষণ পর্যন্ত করছো, this is correct. There is nothing wrong with it. But as we proceed on to more complex topics, you will see that in relational data structure, we don't do things like that. That is, we keep atomic values in cells. প্রত্যেকটা সেলে আমরা atomic structure follow করি। সো পরে গিয়ে দেখবা যে এই জিনিসটাকে আমার ভাঙতেই হচ্ছে, যে যেখানে হচ্ছে গিয়ে মাল্টিপল প্রিরিকুইজিট থাকতে পারে ওটাকে একটু ডিফারেন্ট ওয়েতে আমার অর্গানাইজ করতেই হচ্ছে ডেটাটাকে। ইউ উইল সি দ্যাট while you are on the topic of ERD, একটা ERD যখন ড্র করতে যাবা or ডিজাইন করতে যাবা, this is 100% correct. There is nothing wrong with this. But keeping in mind what we will have to do later on when we actually create the database table create করতে গিয়ে কিছু জিনিস আমাদের চেঞ্জ করতে হবে when it comes to multi-valued attribute, ওই জিনিসগুলো মাথায় রেখে this representation is actually, or this design is actually closer to the physical implementation. This one represents the same data, key information represent করছে, but this is just closer. But ERD draw করার সময় তুমি যদি জিনিসটা এরকম সিম্পল রাখতে চাও, that is completely fine as well. This is 100% correct, this is also 100% correct, and they're representing the same information. Here what we are saying is that, what we are doing here is that prerequisite কে একটা কোর্সের attribute না বানিয়ে prerequisite আমি আলাদা একটা নতুন entity বানাচ্ছি। See here, because prerequisite is a multi-valued attribute, যেহেতু prerequisite একটা multi-valued attribute, prerequisite কে আমি একটা entity বানিয়ে ফেলছি, ঠিক আছে? And we're saying that a course may have multiple prerequisites. That is the fact, right? When an attribute is multi-valued, তার মানে কি? একটা attribute যদি multi-valued হয় তখন আমরা কি বুঝি? তার মানে হচ্ছে কি তার multiple values থাকতে পারে। That is, একটা single কোর্সের multiple prerequisite থাকতে পারে। That's what we understand, তাই না? একটা single কোর্সের multiple prerequisite থাকতে পারে। Basically ওই জিনিসটাই আমরা relationship দিয়ে represent করছি। When we have a multi-valued attribute, yes.
Ma'am, why can't we show it as a unary relationship?
Unary relationship between who and who?
Course and course, because prerequisite is a course. So optional many.
Sure, you could do that. Of course you could do that. That's a good idea as well. Yes, you could do that. Unary relationship from course to course. Why not? You could do that as well. There's nothing wrong with that. Acta course is a prerequisite for another course, or a course has prerequisites which are themselves courses as well. So very good. Yes, unary relationship হিসেবে আমরা এটা represent করতে পারি. So you see here, even that is another representation of the same information, and that's still correct, right? That is also correct. Now, this one here, this one is done keeping in mind how things would be represented in the database table. This is closest to the physical implementation. কেন? কারণ কি আমরা যখন অ্যাকচুয়ালি টেবিলটা বানাবো, ঠিক আছে? সো আমরা যদি লেফট সাইডে যে রিপ্রেজেন্টেশনটা এটার কথা চিন্তা করি, is this visible, guys? Can everyone see the slide and read clearly?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Cool. Okay. So see here, the representation on the left-hand side that we have, the simpler one, that one, while it's fine in the ERD draw করার সময়, this is completely fine. But when we move on to how things will look in the database table, the one on the left-hand side looks more like this, তাই না? যে একটা কোর্স নামের একটা টেবিল থাকবে, ঠিক আছে? এই কোর্স টেবিলটা হচ্ছে গিয়ে, let's say we call it course table. Let's take forever. Okay, sorry about that. Putting me through a world of pain. All right, so let's say this is our course table, okay? This is our course table. So here, in this course table, we would have course ID and a course ID column representing the course ID attributes, and the course title attribute represented by the course title column here, and the prerequisite attribute represented by the prereq column. So for every single course, ধর CC303 course, CC303 course and name, and then the prereqs, all right? CC303 prereq, according to you guys, is CC203, that's all right? and CAC203's prereq is CAC201 and CAC101, let's say, right? এইভাবে করে হচ্ছে কি জিনিসটা রিপ্রেজেন্ট করতে হবে, তাই না? However, as it turns out, you cannot do something like this in relational data structure. Relational data structure, এরকম কোনো কিছু করা যায় না। I'm talking about implementation right now. আমি ERD কথা বলছি না, implementation এ গিয়ে যেতে হয়। So implementation এ গিয়ে আমাদের যেটা করতে হয় অনেক সময়, even শাফা যে সাজেশনটা দিল যে unary relationship বানাবো, course to course has prerequisite, it has prerequisite that we will make it a unary relationship from course to course. That is also correct when you're drawing in the ERD, and that's actually a bit more specific than the representation you have on the left hand side. Left hand side আমরা যেভাবে represent করছি বিষয়টাকে, তার থেকে what you said, Shafai, the unary relationship is a better representation for sure. But even there, even with that, you'd have to do something like this in the actual physical implementation. All right. You'd have to have a separate table for the course entity and a separate table where you keep track of the course ID and the prereq course ID. All right. So there you'd have CC303 and its prereq CC203, and then let's say CC203 and its prereq CC201 and CC101, let's say. That's how you'd have to keep track. The course ID, আমার course নামের একটা আলাদা টেবিল থাকবে, ওখানে course ID, course title, let's say আরেকটা কলাম থাকবে course credit, right? So let's say we'll have something like this. যেখানে একটা কলাম থাকবে credit and so on. আর বাকি যতগুলো কোর্সের অ্যাট্রিবিউটস আছে সবগুলো এখানের মধ্যে let's say থাকবে 3.0, 2.0 and so on, right? এরকম অন্যান্য সব অ্যাট্রিবিউট গুলো থাকবে। But when it comes to a course having a prerequisite, because a course may have multiple prerequisites, যেহেতু একটা কোর্সের multiple prerequisite থাকতে পারে, because of that fact, because a course can have multiple prerequisites, because of that, we will have to create a separate table where we will keep track of the course ID and its prerequisites, right? So ultimately, এটা আমাদেরকে physical implementation, we'd have to do something like that, right? So that's why we're showing you how we can implement these things better using relationships and entities, right? However, please once again remember that ERD draw korte gele, if you feel that this is complicated or this does not still make sense to you, you can always stick to this representation, something simpler. ERD te, if you were to do something like this, J mark paba, if you were to do something like this, eki marki paba, the same mark, right? And because they're both correct. This one is just simply closer to the physical implementation, representing prerequisite, which is a multi-valued attribute, as a separate entity, and there, because prerequisite is an entity that has been created based on a multi-valued attribute, যেহেতু আমি prerequisite create করেছি based on a multi-valued attribute, আমাকে prereq course ID টা তো রাখতে হবে, plus কোন কোর্সের prereq course ID, ওই কোর্সের আইডিও রাখতে হবে, and we will make the identifier or the primary key by combining both of these two. Think about it. Here, look at this table here. When we create the prereq table, as you can see this one here, when we create this table, the one at the bottom, the prereq course course যে টেবিলটা আমরা ক্রিয়েট করব এখানের মধ্যে, is it necessarily going to be the case that the prereq course ID will be unique? Prereq course ID value কি কোন একটা for the entire table, will it be unique?
No.
No, ma'am.
See here, already CAC 101 has been repeated across two rows. CAC 101 is a prereq for multiple courses, right? CAC 101 is a prereq for multiple courses. So clearly, prereq course ID on its own cannot be the identifier or the primary key. কেন? কারণ prereq course ID unique হবে না। একটা কোর্স তো multiple different courses prerequisite হতেই পারে। As you can see, CAC 101 is the prereq for CAC 203 and CAC 201, both of them. It's a prereq for both of these courses, that's it. So, if you make prereq course ID the identifier, that's not going to do. Prereq course ID alone is not going to be unique. Similarly, course ID value কি unique হবে? Will the course ID value be unique in this table, in the prerequisite table?
Yes.
How will it be unique if a certain course has multiple prerequisites? CSE 203 multiple prerequisites আছে. তাহলে CSE 203, as you can see here, it has to be repeated across multiple rows. CSE 203 is an example of a course which has multiple prerequisites. So আমাদেরকে কি করতে হচ্ছে? একটা রোতে রাখলাম CSE 203 এবং তার একটা prerequisite CSE 101 associated একটা prerequisite. Then আরেকটা prerequisite ও আছে CSE 201 is another prerequisite. ওটার জন্য কি করব? আরেকটা রোতে রাখবো. So is CSE 203 unique here? আমি
So
যদি
two
বলি
instances have the same course ID.
Two rows,
instances.
in 2 rows we have the same course ID. So basically what I'm trying to explain to you is that, think about it, course ID, if you were to make course ID alone the identifier, তাহলে কি প্রবলেম হবে এটা চিন্তা করে দেখো। কোর্স আইডি যদি একা আইডেন্টিফায়ার হতো, তার মানে কি প্রত্যেকটা কোর্স আইডি ভ্যালু দিয়ে একটা সিঙ্গেল রো কে ইউনিকলি আইডেন্টিফাই করা যেত, তাই না? অ্যাজ ইউ ক্যান সি ইন দ্য কোর্স টেবল, যে CSE 303 এই কোর্স আইডিটা দিয়ে একটা সিঙ্গেল রোই আইডেন্টিফাইড হয়, ইটস ইউনিক। CSE 303, this course ID is unique for the course table. Course table এর জন্য CSE 303, this course ID is unique because it uniquely identifies this row and only this row in the course table. However, in the prerequisite table, that's a different story. For courses which have multiple prerequisites, think about that. Does CSE 203 uniquely identify a single row in the prerequisite course table? Does it uniquely identify only and only a single row in the prerequisite course table?
No, not at all.
No. CSE 203 যদি আমি বলি, CSE 203 যে রোতে আছে ওই রো থেকে প্রিরেকুইজিট কোর্স আইডিটা বের করে আন। আমি তোমাকে বললাম CSE 203 দিয়ে সার্চ দিতে বললাম, CSE 203 যে রোতে আছে ওই রো থেকে প্রিরেকুইজিট কোর্স আইডি বের করে আনতে বললাম। এখন ডাটাবেস ম্যানেজমেন্ট সফটওয়্যার যেটা আছে সে যাবে দেখবে এই রোতে CSE 203 আছে, এই রোতেও CSE 203 আছে, তাহলে আমি কোনটাকে নিব? Should I take CSE 101 or CSE 201? It will be confused because CSE 203, that value does not point to a single row. It points to 2 rows at the same time. So is it unique then? No, it's not. It does not uniquely identify a single instance of the prerequisite course table, or it does not uniquely identify a single row. As simple as that. It does not uniquely identify a single row. It identifies multiple rows. So course ID alone cannot be the identifier. Course table, it works. Course ID can work as the identifier of the course table because here, on the other hand, every single course ID value uniquely identifies a single course instance. But in this table, however, that's not the case. Same goes for prereq course ID as well. Prereq course ID, when we're talking about it alone, prereq course ID when it's alone, eka identifier hote parbe na. As you can see here, these 2 rows, both of these 2 rows have CSE 101. যদি আমি এখন বলি CSE 101 যে রোতে প্রিরেক কোর্স আইডি ওই রো থেকে কোর্স আইডি বের করে আনো, and then you go to the table and you see that CSE 101 is there in 2 rows, which one will you pick? You don't know that. So there you go. CSE 101 does not uniquely identify a single row in the prerequisite course table. It's there in 2 rows. So that's why we have to think about how can we make it unique. CSE 303 or CSE 203 alone may not be unique. But what about the combination? CSE 203 is there in multiple rows, sure. But what about the combination CSE 203 plus CSE 101? এই দুটোকে combine করলে, is that combination going to be duplicated? এই combinationটা কি multiple repetition থাকবে? Multiple occurrence থাকবে? No. There's no way. আমি তো অলরেডি এখানে রিপ্রেজেন্ট করে দিয়েছি that CSE 203 এই কোর্সটার প্রিরেক কোর্স আইডি CSE 101 এখানে বলে দিয়েছি। আরেকটা রোতে আবারও আমি CSE 203 আর CSE 101 আন্ডার কোর্স আইডি এন্ড আন্ডার প্রিরেক কোর্স আইডি তো আমি রাখবো না। এই জিনিসটাকে আমি, is there any reason for me to do something like this, CAC 203, and then again here I will write CAC 11? No, of course we will not do something like that. So we can assume that the combination will be unique on the other hand. That is exactly why here you see, when we create the prereq course table, when we create the prerequisite table or the prerequisite entity, when we are talking about the prerequisite entity, the identifier is made by combining course ID and prereq course ID, both of them together. Because a single course ID cannot uniquely identify every single row of prerequisite. A single prereq course ID as well cannot uniquely identify a row in prerequisite table or entity. You need both. The combination will be unique. Course ID একা unique হবে না, prereq course ID ও একা unique হবে না, but the combination will be unique. And remember, in order for an attribute to be an identifier, it must be unique. None of these are unique on their own, but combined they are unique. So prerequisite entity identifier ta banabo ami kiভাবে? By combining both of them. That's why, as you can see, both of them are bold and underlined, because both of them are part of the identifier. Together they make up the primary key. Okay.
Would we have the same problem in a NoSQL database?
Exactly. That's why relational data structure হচ্ছে গিয়ে তোমার, as you can see, যে NoSQL এর ক্ষেত্রে এই ইন্টিগ্রিটি রুলস গুলো তো বসানো থাকে না, যে ডেটা স্ট্রাকচার, যে রিলেশনাল ডেটা স্ট্রাকচারে যে আমরা কিছু রুলস ফলো করি। ফর এক্সাম্পল দিস ওয়ান হিয়ার, যেখানে আমরা বলে দিয়েছি যে একটা সেলে, in a single cell we will have singular data entry, that is the data will be atomic. এই যে এখানে যে আমরা এই মাল্টিপল ডেটা এন্টার করছি একটা সিঙ্গেল সেলে, while we see this here, but in a relational data structure we cannot do that at all. It's not allowed in a relational data structure. However, rules such as this are not in place when we're talking about a non-relational database. So NoSQL এর ক্ষেত্রে এই ধরনের রুলগুলো নেই, but NoSQL এর অন্যান্য usages আছে, অন্যান্য advantages আছে. For example, fast data searches and all that. However, when it comes to data manipulation, যে ডেটার উপর যখন প্রসেসিং কাজ করতে হয়, ঠিক আছে, যে আমি ডেটাটাকে প্রসেস করব, ওখানে এসে NoSQL is not always reliable, not always well organized, and also not always fast. All right, when it comes to data manipulation. But when it comes to data searches, NoSQL. But once again, I'm straying away from the topic. But anyway, yeah, relational data structure হচ্ছে গিয়ে to fix these issues, এই প্রবলেমগুলো না থাকার জন্য হচ্ছে গিয়ে আমরা কিছু ইন্টিগ্রিটি রুল ফলো করি, ঠিক আছে, ডেটা ইন্টিগ্রিটি রুল ফলো করি। NoSQL এই জিনিসগুলো নেই। Yeah, so to answer your question, basically, yes, if you were to create a data model, a NoSQL data model for a system which has a lot of data processing and the data structure itself is a stable one, that would be a poor choice to go with, because NoSQL has these issues. Okay. All right. So moving on. While we're on the topic of ERD, I don't want you guys to get too confused. Prerequisite multi-valued attribute, no problem. রাখো, prerequisite multi-valued হিসেবে আছে। আপাতত হচ্ছে কি আমরা ফিউচার নিয়ে চিন্তা করলাম, পরে নেক্সট যে কমপ্লিকেশন যেগুলো আসবে ওগুলো নিয়ে আপাতত চিন্তা করলাম। But this is also correct. That's what I'm trying to tell you. The prerequisite multi-valued attribute যেটা আছে, এটাকে আমরা এভাবেও চাইলে রিপ্রেজেন্ট করতে পারি। If we want, we can represent it in this way as well, but this is completely fine. In the exam, you will find that ERD draw করতে গিয়ে তোমাদের enough time থাকছে না. You will not find enough time. প্রজেক্টের জন্য you can go into these levels of details. প্রজেক্টের জন্য এরকম detailed ERD যদি draw করো, তোমার future steps গুলো আরো easy হবে. They will become a lot easier. But in the exam, actually, I would recommend you to stick to the simpler side. Exam যখন ERD draw করতে যাবা, trust me, you will not find enough time. You will not have enough time to go into detailed analysis and all that, those things. All right. So exam গিয়ে যেটা first মাথায় আসে, the simpler representation, just stick to that. You won't have enough time for these sorts of more complex, detailed representation. But for your project, you can maybe test these ideas out. All right. Okay. Now moving on. Here, once again, let me specifically ask one of you guys. Let's go with Qazi Abdullah Fuad. Fuad, can you hear me?
Yes, miss.
Okay. Fuad, can you help us out and tell us here, employer mode, what type of attribute is skill?
Which one?
Skill.
Multi.
Multi what? What is multi? I don't know anything that's called multi.
Multi-valued.
Multi-valued. Yes, but not just
and,
multi-valued.
And composite as
and
well.
composite at the same time. All right? Yeah, that's right. So see here, like Fuad pointed out, skill here is not just a multi-valued attribute. It's a composite multi-valued attribute. Or it's a multi-valued composite attribute, whichever way you want to say it. That is, it's both multi-valued and composite at the same time. How do we know that it's a composite attribute as well?
First bracket.
Because
That's right.
skill is broken down into skill code and skill.
That's right, exactly.
Divided by parts.
If you look at the notation, right after skill, we have 3 component parts put inside parenthesis, first bracket, all right? যখনই আমরা এই নোটেশন দেখবো যে একটা অ্যাট্রিবিউটের নামের পরে হচ্ছে গিয়ে প্যারেনথেসিস শুরু হয়েছে অথবা ফার্স্ট ব্র্যাকেট শুরু হয়েছে, তখনই ওটা দেখেই তোমাদের বুঝে নিতে হবে যে এখানে একটা কম্পোজিট অ্যাট্রিবিউট আছে। আর কম্পোজিট অ্যাট্রিবিউটটার কম্পোনেন্ট পার্টগুলো কি কি? স্কিল কোড, স্কিল টাইটেল, স্কিল টাইপ। As you can see inside the parentheses, we have the component parts of the skill attribute separated by commas, all right? And it's surrounded, the whole thing is enclosed by curly braces. So that's why it's a multi-valued attribute as well at the same time. So it's a composite multi-valued attribute. Now here we have a bit of complication. Because remember, once again, the multi-valued attribute ক্ষেত্রে আমরা যখন physical implementation এর কথা চিন্তা করি তখন তো হচ্ছে গিয়ে একটা সিঙ্গেল সেলে মাল্টিপল ভ্যালুজ রাখতে পারি না, বাট এখানে তো আরো কমপ্লিকেটেড হয়ে গেল জিনিসটা। নট অনলি ইজ ইট মাল্টি-ভ্যালুড, ইটস অলসো কম্পোজিট। সো কম্পোনেন্ট পার্টগুলোর ভ্যালু কোথায় রাখবো? থিঙ্ক অ্যাবাউট দ্যাট। থিঙ্ক অ্যাবাউট দ্য টেবল, দ্য এমপ্লয়ি টেবল। এমপ্লয়ি টেবলে স্কিল নামের একটা কলাম আছে, স্কিল কলামের আন্ডারে আমি মাল্টিপল স্কিল না হয় রাখলাম, ভালো কথা, মাল্টিপল স্কিল রাখলাম, বাট মাল্টিপল স্কিলের ভ্যালুর মধ্যে কোনটা স্কিল কোড, কোনটা স্কিল টাইটেল, কোনটা স্কিল টাইপ কিভাবে রিপ্রেজেন্ট করবো? ইজ দেয়ার এনি ওয়ে টু ডু দ্যাট? If an employee has multiple skills under the skill column, we can, let's say we put multiple skills there under the skill column, sure, but which one is skill code, which one is skill type, which one is skill title? How do we know? How do we separate the component parts? কিভাবে আলাদা করব? স্কিলের কলামের আন্ডারে আমি যদি বলি যে let's say English speaking skills and C++ coding skills, let's say something like that, just random বললাম, ঠিক আছে? এই দুটো স্কিল রাখলাম, বাট এই দুটোটা স্কিলের তো কম্পোনেন্ট পার্টগুলো আছে, কম্পোনেন্ট পার্টগুলো কিভাবে রিপ্রেজেন্ট? There's no way we can do that, can we? So actually on the right hand side we are representing the same information, the same relationship, the same data, everything is the same, but this is actually closer to the physical data implementation. Our actual physical database আমরা যেভাবে টেবিলগুলোকে রিপ্রেজেন্ট করব, this is closer to that. What we would do is just how previously এই যে multi-valued attribute এর জন্য একটা আলাদা entity create করেছি, see here prerequisite একটা multi-valued attribute, so কি করেছি, prerequisite এর জন্য আমরা একটা নতুন একটা entity create করেছি। Similarly, skill একটা multi-valued attribute as well as a composite attribute, sure, but because it's also a multi-valued attribute, স্কিল একটা মাল্টি-ভ্যালুড অ্যাট্রিবিউট হওয়ার কারণে আমরা স্কিলের একটা নতুন এন্টিটি ক্রিয়েট করব। We will create a new entity called skill, right? Now, here prerequisite didn't have any component parts because it's not a composite attribute. Prerequisite the composite attribute না, so it didn't have any component parts. Skill on the other hand has component parts. So স্কিলের কম্পোনেন্ট পার্টগুলো আমরা কি করব? স্কিল নামের একটা নতুন অ্যাট্রিবিউট বানালাম, the component parts become attributes of this new entity. Skill নামে একটা নতুন entity বানালাম, the component parts of the skill composite attribute becomes attributes of the new entity. So skill code, skill title, skill type এগুলোকে গিয়ে আমি attribute হিসেবে assign করব to the new skill entity, right? Simple as that. And next, what can we do? We can create a new table to represent the relationship between employee and skill. The fact that an employee can have multiple skills to represent that, right? We can do that. Also, by the way, it possesses, মাঝখানে যে possesses এন্টিটিটাকে যে আনলাম রিলেশনশিপটাকে রিপ্রেজেন্ট করার জন্য, এটাকে কমপ্লিটলি বাদ দিয়ে স্কিলের মধ্যেই কিন্তু আমি এমপ্লয়ি আইডি রাখতে পারি if we want. We can keep employee ID and skill, but in that case, employee ID and skill code, both of them would have to be combined together to make up the brand. And you would have skill title and skill tab obviously duplicated, or you would have to repeat those values for every single one of the combinations, employee skill combination. So this is actually the representation that is closest to the physical database, all right? That you would have a new entity, skill নামের একটা নতুন entity কেন create করেছি? Because skill এখানে একটা multi-valued attribute, just like before. Prerequisite multi-valued attribute সাথে সাথে prerequisite নামের একটা নতুন entity create করলাম। এখানেও skill নামের একটা নতুন entity create করলাম। But wait, skill is also a composite attribute here. Skill তো composite attribute। So component part গুলোকে আমি কোথায় assign করব? Skill নতুন entity, skill নামের নতুন entity-টাতে assign করব। But an employee can have multiple skills. একজন employee তো multiple skill থাকতে পারে। However, at the same time, a single skill can be possessed by multiple employees as well, তাই না? একজন employee যার হচ্ছে English speaking skills আছে, let's say, that skill, let's say English communication skill or whatever you call it, that skill could be possessed by multiple other employees as well, তাই না? So it's like a many-to-many relationship between employee and skill. An employee can have multiple skills, and a single skill could be possessed by multiple employees. So it's a many-to-many relationship in that sense. So what we can do in that case is use or create a new entity, possesses entity, to represent the relationship between employee and skill. An employee may possess multiple skills, a skill may be possessed by multiple employees. And because it's a many-to-many relationship, এই যে আমাদের আগে যে কেসটা ছিল, এই যে এই কেসটার মতো prerequisite যে ঝামেলাটা দেখেছিলাম, course ID alone is not unique, prereq course ID alone is not unique either. Similarly, এখানেও because an employee can have multiple skills, skill code is not going to be unique. Because a skill could be possessed by multiple employees, employee ID is not going to be unique either, but the combination will be unique, right? So that's why the identifier of the possesses entity is made up by combining both of these two together. An employee may possess multiple skills. A skill may be possessed by multiple employees.
Ma'am?
Yes.
PK, FK1. FK meaning?
FK meaning টা আমরা পরে দেখবো। এখন বলে দিই FK হচ্ছে কি foreign key. Foreign key, we call those attributes foreign keys, or those, let's say just those attributes foreign keys, which are identifiers to another entity, right? Employee ID, even though it's an attribute in the possesses entity, employee ID the possesses entity মধ্যে আমি attribute হিসেবে রেখে দিলাম, but originally where does it come from? Employee ID কোত্থেকে আসছে? Employee. Originally, remember that it belongs to the employee entity as the primary key, no less. The employee ID was originally the primary key of the employee entity. ওখান থেকে আমি possesses এ আনলাম as an attribute. Whenever we do that, we call it a foreign key. একটা attribute যখন আমি আনবো অন্য আরেকটা entity থেকে, যেটা অন্য আরেকটা entity-তে primary key ছিল, when we bring in an attribute which was a primary key of another entity, we call it a foreign key. Similarly, skill code, এখানে possesses এর মধ্যে attribute হিসেবে আনলাম, but originally skill code is the primary key of the skill entity. So skill code কে আমরা এখানে এনেছি from the skill entity. Skill entity থেকে skill code কে attribute হিসেবে possesses এ আনলাম, but originally তো skill code হচ্ছে কি it's a primary key of the skill entity. So we will call it a foreign key for the possesses entity. Skill code is a foreign key for the possesses entity. It's a part of the primary key, yes. Here, in this specific example, employee ID, skill code, both of them are part of the primary key as well. But they are also foreign keys for the possesses entity. Similarly, here as well, even though এখানে mark করা হয়নি, prerequisite table of a prerequisite entity, in the prerequisite entity, there is a foreign key. Can you tell me which one that is?
Course ID.
That's right. Course ID is a foreign key in the prerequisite table. Because course ID যে value গুলো এগুলো আমরা আনছি কোথা থেকে? Course table থেকে আনছি. So course ID is actually the identifier of the course table. So it's a foreign key here. It's a foreign key referencing the course ID of the course table. In fact, prereq course ID, even though it's মানে course ID আর prereq course ID দুটোটার নাম একই না হলেও, in fact prereq course ID itself is a foreign key. কেন? Ultimately prereq course ID এর মধ্যে ভ্যালুটা আমি কি রাখছি? What value am I putting there? Is it some new value that we are coming up with? prereq course ID থেকে আমরা কি from scratch কোনো নতুন ভ্যালু রাখছি? No, prereq course ID এর মধ্যে তো আমরা course ID রাখছি. Remember the examples that we saw in the table. Here in the prereq course ID table, prereq course ID column, what is this? CAC203, what is this? What is CAC203?
Course ID.
It's a course ID. CAC201, it's a course ID. It's referencing to the CAC201 course ID from the course table. So actually, here, both course ID and prereq course ID, both of them are foreign keys as well. Even though এখানে FK1 notation or FK1, FK2 notation use করা হয়নি, course ID, prereq course ID, both of them are foreign keys because দোনোটার মধ্যে যে value গুলো store করছি, ওগুলার origin কোথায়? Where is the origin for the values? The course ID primary key of the course table. The course ID. Now, however, you don't need to concern yourselves with the idea of a foreign key for now. ERD তে we don't bother ourselves with foreign keys. মানে প্রজেক্টের জন্য যদি foreign key নোট মানে আগে থেকে ডিনোট করে রাখো তোমাদের জন্য ভালো হবে. You will learn more and things will be easier and clearer as you proceed. But in the exam, don't bother with that at all. কোনটা foreign key না, ERD তে এটা point out করাটা not necessary. ERD তে আমাদের যে জিনিসগুলো absolutely necessary এগুলো হচ্ছে গিয়ে entity notations, attribute notations, relationship notations গুলো, ঠিক আছে? But কোনটা foreign key নাকি কোনটা foreign key না এটা point out করাটা mandatory. If you want to, you can for sure, but it's not mandatory. For the project, I would recommend pointing out the foreign key so that you learn better. But for the exam, you don't need to worry about that. Now, moving on. Here, see here, we have a special type of attribute, department. So, Orpita Shaha, can you hear me? Orpita? There? Yes, no? Orpita, can you tell me? Here, department. What type of attribute do we have here in department? Employee mode, department, the attribute department, whatever attribute is it? Is it a regular attribute? It's a primary key? What is it? Department. I'm not sure, Arpita, if you're saying anything, but surely I can't hear anything from your end. So anyone else?
Composite.
Composite, that's right. It's a composite attribute. So Arpita, we know this is a composite attribute because a department attribute-টার নাম যে দেখতে পাচ্ছ department এর পরে কিন্তু একটা bracket শুরু হয়েছে, as you can see here. Bracket শুরু হলো যখনই একটা attribute-এর পরপর আমরা এই first bracket শুরু করে first bracket শেষ করব আর এর মাঝে হচ্ছে কি এরকম component parts আলাদা করব কমা দিয়ে, we know that that attribute is a composite attribute. Department একটা composite attribute. Composite attribute কেন বলছি? কারণ কি department has component parts. Department number, department name, budget. It has component parts. Department number, name, budget. So it's a composite attribute. All right? That's why we're calling it a composite attribute. Department number, department name, department budget. Just how multi-valued attribute আমরা বুঝি যদি attribute, if the attribute is surrounded with curly braces, we call it a multi-valued attribute. Similarly, if after the attribute, right after that, the attribute, we have a first bracket opening and then the component parts written down, separated by commas and then closing bracket, এই যে এই নোটেশনটা থাকলে আমরা ওটাকে কম্পোজিট অ্যাট্রিবিউট ধরে নিয়ে থাকি, বিকজ it's basically telling us যে এই অ্যাট্রিবিউটটা কিছু কম্পোনেন্ট পার্ট আছে, ডিপার্টমেন্ট নাম্বার, ডিপার্টমেন্ট নেম, বাজেট। Abhida, does it make sense?
Yes, miss.
Okay. Try to remember these things from now on, all right?
Okay, miss.
Okay. All right.
ম্যাম এমপ্লয়ি নেমটা ম্যাম কোনো কি অ্যাট্রিবিউটে পড়ে? এমপ্লয়ি নেম,
Employee name is the name of the employee. I'm not sure what your question is, Diba.
ম্যাম এমপ্লয়ি আইডির পরে এমপ্লয়ি নেম, এটা কি কোনো অ্যাট্রিবিউট?
That's right. Of course, it's an attribute. Why not?
এটা কি অ্যাট্রিবিউট?
The name of the employee.
হ্যাঁ,
মানে এমপ্লয়ি তো একটা আইডি থাকবে, নাম থাকবে, তাই না?
যেমন হচ্ছে ডিপার্টমেন্ট একটা কম্পোজিট অ্যাট্রিবিউট, কিন্তু হচ্ছে এই এমপ্লয়ি নেমটা কি অ্যাট্রিবিউট? মানে
It's a
এখানে
regular
তো
attribute. না কোনো নোটেশন নাই। হ্যাঁ, আমরা তো অ্যাট্রিবিউটের নোটেশন গুলো পড়েছিলাম না, ডোন্ট ইউ রিমেম্বার? যখন হচ্ছে গিয়ে it's an identifier, it's bold and underlined. When it's multi-valued, it's surrounded by curly braces. It's composite, as you can see
আচ্ছা,
here.
হ্যাঁ
It's
ম্যাম
perfect.
ভুলে গেছিলাম। আচ্ছা,
That's fine. That's fine. All of these topics are relatively new to you guys. So as you practice more, it'll be easier to remember. যখন হচ্ছে কি একটা অ্যাট্রিবিউট কোনো নোটেশন ছাড়া সিম্পলি লেখা থাকে, it's just a regular attribute. ঠিক আছে?
ওকে ম্যাম, থ্যাংক ইউ ম্যাম।
Okay. That is name হচ্ছে কি কোনো কম্পোজিট অ্যাট্রিবিউট না কিছু না, নেম হচ্ছে কি একটা রেগুলার অ্যাট্রিবিউট। এখানের মধ্যে সিম্পলি নামটা স্টোর করব, not as a composite, not just regularly, just like any other attribute. Okay. Now moving on. Department. What do you guys think? What could this department attribute represent? A department attribute টা কি represent করছে? Employee department বলতে কি বোঝাচ্ছে? Can anyone make a guess? এই যে ডিপার্টমেন্টটা কি স্টোর করছে? What is it storing?
ও কোন ডিপার্টমেন্টে কাজ করতেছে?
That's right. That's right. Exactly. Which department the employee works for. So we could do something like this for sure. Employee মধ্যে আমি ডিপার্টমেন্ট একটা অ্যাট্রিবিউট হিসেবে রেখে দিলাম, ডিপার্টমেন্ট নাম্বার, নেম, বাজেট। However, this is not really an efficient design. Why is that? Because what happens when we need this department information for some other relationships or in association with some other entities? Let's say, for example, here, let's say the department could be associated with the project entity, as you can see here. What if there is a relationship between the department and the project entity? That is, a department has many projects. What if it's associated with many such other entities, like organizational unit? A department belongs to exactly one organizational unit. এই জিনিসটা কি আমরা ডিপার্টমেন্টের সাথে এই রিলেশনশিপ গুলা কি, if we follow the design on the left hand side এ যে ডিজাইন আছে, এই রিলেশনশিপ গুলো আমরা কি এস্টাবলিশ করতে পারবো? এই রিলেশনশিপ গুলো কি রিপ্রেজেন্ট করতে পারবো? নো, বিকজ ডিপার্টমেন্ট ইজ হাইডিং বিহাইন্ড এমপ্লয়ি। ডিপার্টমেন্টের সাথে অন্যান্য এন্টিটির যে রিলেশনশিপ গুলো আছে, আমরা এটা কিভাবে রিপ্রেজেন্ট করব? How do we do that? We can't do that because department is inside employee. আমি তো এমপ্লয়ির সাথে রিলেশনশিপ করতে পারি, ডিপার্টমেন্টের সাথে করতেই পারছি না, কারণ ডিপার্টমেন্ট ইজ নট অ্যান এন্টিটি হিয়ার এট অল। ডিপার্টমেন্টকে তো আমি এন্টিটি হিসেবে রিপ্রেজেন্টই করছি না, I'm representing that as an attribute, which is completely inefficient. Because what if department is associated with other entity types? A department may have many projects, a department may belong to an organizational unit. How do we represent those information? A information like you have a fact like you have represent. We can't do that following the design on the left hand side. তাহলে আমাদের কি করতে হবে? আমাদের তখন দেখা যাবে প্রজেক্টের মধ্যে গিয়ে হচ্ছে গিয়ে whichever department the project belongs to, প্রজেক্টের মধ্যে গিয়ে ওই ডিপার্টমেন্টের ইনফরমেশন স্টোর করতে হবে। প্রজেক্টের মধ্যে এই যে এমপ্লয়ের মধ্যে যেমন কি একটা ডিপার্টমেন্ট অ্যাট্রিবিউট রেখেছি, এই ডিপার্টমেন্ট অ্যাট্রিবিউট যে এমপ্লয়ের মধ্যে রেখেছি, এরকম করে একটা ডিপার্টমেন্ট অ্যাট্রিবিউট, ডিপার্টমেন্ট নামের একটা কম্পোজিট অ্যাট্রিবিউট এভাবে প্রজেক্টের মধ্যে রাখতে হবে। which department the project belongs to, ওখানের মধ্যে আমি ইনফরমেশনটা রেখে দিলাম। But can anyone tell me what's the flaw with this sort of data design? এই যে ডিপার্টমেন্টকে আমি এমপ্লয়ের মধ্যে রাখলাম, প্রজেক্টের মধ্যে রাখলাম, যে একজন এমপ্লয় কোন ডিপার্টমেন্টে কাজ করে ওই ইনফরমেশন আমি এমপ্লয়ের মধ্যেই রাখলাম। একটা প্রজেক্ট কোন ডিপার্টমেন্ট, which department it belongs to, ওই ইনফরমেশনের প্রজেক্টে রাখলাম। What's wrong with that?
Mr. Redundancy.
Redundancy, duplication. What happens when you need to update something regarding the department? ধরো
Yes, you
ডিপার্টমেন্টের
need to
নেম or
update it
budget.
everywhere.
Exactly.
So
Exactly. More error prone. It's very difficult in these cases to maintain data integrity. All right. And think about it when you have thousands and thousands and thousands of rows of data. All right. So it's definitely not in keeping with our relational data model. Relational data model follow করে এই ধরনের কাজগুলো আমরা করি না. In fact, so much so that in the exam, if you were to do something like this, you would get 0. Right? এই ধরনের কোনো কিছু করি। Why? Because একটা ডিপার্টমেন্ট যখন অন্যান্য এন্টিটির সাথে রিলেটেড থাকবে, when it is associated with multiple other entities, তখন ডিপার্টমেন্টকে একটা এন্টিটি হিসেবে রিপ্রেজেন্ট করতে হবে। সে তাকে যদি তুমি এমপ্লয়ের মধ্যে অ্যাট্রিবিউট হিসেবে রাখো, you can associate with other entities, তখন কি করতে হবে, তাকে অ্যাট্রিবিউট হিসেবে অন্যান্য এন্টিটির মধ্যেও আনতে হবে, which is completely inefficient and it doesn't agree with some of the basic rules of our data relational data model concepts at all. Yeah. Any questions? Were there any questions? Okay.
So like instead of the department thing in there, we should have put like a department number in the employee attribute. Just the department number, which then points to the department entity.
We'll get to that later. Just shortly, we'll get to that. Yes, later on, actually, yeah, we do something like that. While we're drawing the ERD, we don't concern ourselves with that. But later on, we do something like that. But before putting department number or something like that as a foreign key pointing towards the department, actual department, before doing something like that, we would have to first create a department entity, no? We'll get to that, but later. But before doing that, we need to create a department entity. We cannot put department as an attribute under employee. We need to create a department entity separately, right? So that when the department entity is associated with other entity types, we can easily establish that relationship via these relationship lines, which we couldn't have done if it was hiding behind employee, right? So department number, আমরা একটা নতুন entity create করব. And the component parts of the department attributes obviously will become attributes of the new department entity. All right?
ওকে ম্যাম আমাদের কি একটু ব্রেক দেওয়া যাবে?
Sure. Okay. Let's just finish this discussion and then we'll take a quick break, but not longer than 10 minutes, though, right? Okay.
Okay, ma'am.
All right. Then. So, yeah, basically what I'm trying to tell you here is that whenever you see that you have a certain data object which is going to be associated with multiple other data objects, তখন right away you should make it an entity type. Department একটা data object যে হচ্ছে গিয়ে multiple other entity type এর সাথে associated হবে. A department may conduct multiple projects. A department will belong to exactly one organization. Then so on and so forth, এরকম আরো অনেক relationship থাকতেই পারে. Also, it has its own set of attributes, by the way, as well. And it will have its own multiple instances as well. So obviously, department should be an entity type instead of an attribute under some other entity. Department should be its own entity type. And then what can we do? Department can নিজস্ব entity বানানো পরে এই যে the fact that an employee works for a department, an employee works for a department. And notice that here department is not multi-valued. Department কিন্তু multi-valued না. Department যেহেতু multi-valued না, so what does that mean? An employee cannot work for more than one department. An employee works for exactly one department. An employee has a department attribute. That is, an employee works for a department and only one department at that. Employee মধ্যে একটা department attribute রেখেছি, but এটা multi-valued না. So an employee works for a department and only one department. An employee is employed under exactly one department. A department, on the other hand, obviously, we know that already, may employ multiple employees, right? And so on. So what you guys were talking about, one of you guys, Sabit, I think, was talking about how we could put the department number in employee. We would do that later on. Once we have created the department entity, পরে গিয়ে আমরা যখন অ্যাকচুয়ালি ডাটাবেস টেবিলগুলো ক্রিয়েট করি তখন হচ্ছে গিয়ে আমরা এই রিলেশনশিপটা, এই যে এমপ্লয়িজ রিলেশনশিপটা, ডাটাবেস টেবিলে গিয়ে এমপ্লয়িজ রিলেশনশিপটা আমরা কিভাবে রিপ্রেজেন্ট করবো, আমরা যেটা করে থাকি এমপ্লয়ি টেবিলের মধ্যে ডিপার্টমেন্ট নাম্বার নামের একটা ফরেন কি নিয়ে আসবো। ইটস নট গোইং টু বি আ পার্ট অফ দ্য প্রাইমারি কি, জাস্ট একটা রেগুলার অ্যাট্রিবিউট হিসেবে ফরেন কি হিসেবে নিয়ে আসবো, which will tell us that the employee belongs to that specific department. ঠিক আছে, we'll do that, but more on that later. We'll do something like that, but later. For now, let's not focus on that. For now, let's keep things simple. আপাতত সিম্পল রাখি জিনিসগুলো। আপাতত আমরা ধরে নিই কোন একটা ডেটা অবজেক্টে যদি a set of attributes থাকে, plus it will have multiple instances, plus it will be associated with multiple other data objects, তাহলে ওটাকে একটা এন্টিটি হিসেবেই আমরা রিপ্রেজেন্ট করব, right? Okay, let's take a quick break now.